major breaking news in the National Football League that I think creates a really interesting betting opportunity this weekend for you and for me with the Carolina Panthers, as the news coming down a couple hours ago that the Panthers have benched last year's number one overall pick, Bryce Young, has been benched after only 2 games into this season with the new head coach, the quarterback whisperer, Dave Canales. Bryce Young has been benched in favor of Andy Dalton. I'll do like a quick thought on Bryce Young, and then we'll move on to the betting stuff because it's all really interesting now moving forward with the Panthers. I feel bad for Bryce Young. I think you can have empathy for the young man, and look, like he's completely shot. He knows it. Says after the game yesterday where he's brutal again, and the Panthers look like maybe the worst team we've ever seen, that his confidence comes from the Lord. Good for him, and like that's what he should be saying and thinking. Like he's got to say something to make himself feel better. Also in that moment, you know it's over for Bryce Young. Not only does Bryce Young know that he's terrible, his teammates know he's terrible. He knows that they know he's terrible, and they know that he knows that they know he's terrible. Did you follow me on that one? I think it made sense. It's over for Bryce Young. He can't play. It's done. He won't be on the Panthers next season. He might not play in the NFL again. Bryce Young is short, slow, and doesn't have a good arm. He's like me, except he plays quarterback in the NFL. It's over. It's finished. And, if we were still alive in Survivor, I'm pissed at Femi and Tyler today, also the Detroit Lions, also myself. I think, we would all be ruining, and if you're still alive in your Survivor League, God bless you. We should all be ruining this day because the Raiders were going to be the free square this weekend at home against the Carolina Panthers in Survivor. Because Bryce Young's the worst. The betting market for Panthers-Raiders, when we assumed Bryce Young was going to be the quarterback, was Raiders -7. Gardner Minshew, laying 7. Antonio Pierce, laying 7. I love the Raiders. I bet them yesterday. It was awesome. They won on the road in Baltimore. Also, should never, ever be laying 7 against another NFL team. But the Panthers, with Bryce Young, were not an NFL team. They're like a quadruple A team. Not quite triple A, not quite the majors, stuck in purgatory. That was the Carolina Panthers. And I'm not here to tell you that Andy Dalton is any great shakes. I'm not here to tell you that Dalton is even the quarterback that he was early in his career with the Cincinnati Bengals. He's not one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's probably not one of the best 25 starting quarterbacks in the league. But what Andy Dalton is serviceable. Andy Dalton can run a functional NFL offense. Bryce Young, and I don't mean to pile on. I'm saying I feel bad for the young man, but let's keep it real. It's a betting show. Bryce Young cannot run a functional NFL offense. Andy Dalton last year, now different coaching staff, obviously, with Frank Reich before Reich got fired, played week 3 in relief of Bryce Young, which kind of felt like at the time was we need to sit him down because he's terrible. And they lost to Seattle 37-27. But Andy Dalton in that game last year, week 3, starting for the Panthers, 34 of 58. 361 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I don't know what this is going to look like if they're going to throw it 58 times this weekend on the road at the Raiders. But what we do know is Andy Dalton can at least have a successful game here or there, get the ball to some relatively decent playmakers. This isn't the greatest show on turf, St. Louis Rams, but Deontay Johnson can get open. Adam Thielen's decent. Some intriguing young receivers with Xavier Legette and Jonathan Mingo. I'm not trying to say this is one of the best offenses ever, but they shouldn't look as bad as they had. And the reason why, obviously, was Bryce Young. And we don't even have to get into all the statistics of how bad Bryce Young is. We can, though. 84 passing yards yesterday on 25 attempts. Think about that. Third player in 20 seasons to average 4 or fewer yards per dropback in 4 consecutive starts. It is over for Bryce Young. And look, we've seen this from Dave Canales the last couple years. Resuscitated the career of Geno Smith. Resuscitated the career of Baker Mayfield. Is it possible? This is not me making a case for the Panthers to make the playoffs. They're still bad. They're just not the worst team ever with Andy Dalton starting at quarterback. Is it possible this offense and this team can be at least slightly below average the rest of the season, which would be a seismic upgrade over what they were with Bryce Young? So I tell you, Raiders were 7 with Bryce Young. Now the number's 5.5. I was one of the people that grabbed the 7 before it could get pulled off the board. And now I think we'll have an interesting betting market, interesting discussion about this game the rest of the week. Is this number going to keep moving far enough down where you'd consider laying the Raiders, even with Antonio Pierce and Gardner Minshew, where you'd consider laying the Raiders? Or do you think that Andy Dalton and the Panthers might actually be live in this game?
It's kind of a bummer for Bryce Young, but it probably had to happen just based on how he was playing. Like, I don't see how Carolina can continue to trot him out there. And if you're Dave Canales, who's in his first year as a head coach, and if you want to establish credibility in that locker room, which I know sounds cliche and kind of like rah-rah, but it's, I think, a real thing amongst NFL players. If you want to establish that credibility, how do you stand up there in front of the other 52 guys and say, yeah, Bryce Young is our best quarterback, and we're going to continue to back him? Like, the other guys have eyeballs. They see that he's terrible, so you couldn't keep going down this road. So I think that's why Canales made the move now, as opposed to kind of letting it linger and then perhaps losing the locker room, which is something that no coach wants to do, especially a coach who has zero skins on the wall, given the fact that this is his first year as a head coach. But I have some other stats for you, though, Alex. Bryce Young, he has the lowest expected points added, which is EPA, per dropback among quarterbacks since 2022, with a minimum of 500 dropbacks. So that's lower than guys like Desmond Ridder. That's lower than your old fella Kenny Pickett, Josh Dobbs, Davis Mills, Sam Howell, and yes, even the great Zach Wilson has a better EPA per dropback than Bryce Young. Like, it's been that bad for Bryce Young. And then this season, the first couple of weeks, on passes of 10-plus air yards, Bryce Young, 6 for 20, 123, 3 interceptions. Those stats courtesy Austin Gale over at The Ringer, dropping those on Twitter. But it's been a disaster for Bryce Young so far in his career, which I completely whiffed. I thought he was going to be awesome coming out of Alabama. Those Bama teams that he was on, they weren't like super stacked like the ones that had won national titles in the past. And he was really good and took them to a national title and then won an SEC. They were really good teams. But he was like the main reason why they were awesome. And I thought he was going to be awesome in the NFL. Clearly I was wrong. And clearly a lot of people were wrong, because the Panthers, they traded up the sun, the moon, and the stars to go ahead and get him. I'm sure Bears fans very, very happy that they didn't draft Bryce Young in that draft, because, boy, this is a really bad situation for the Panthers, and I'm not sure how they get out of it, because they gave up so many assets to go ahead and acquire him. From a betting standpoint, though, when this happened, we were all chatting in our text chat that we had, and I think both myself and Nick, who will tell you this a little bit later on, very much interested in the Panthers. So those were bets that were jammed in right after this news came out. I am now backing the Carolina Panthers this week, as is the rest of the market.
Panthers got bet from a 7-point underdog on the road in Vegas, now 5.5-point dog on the road in Vegas. Do you like the Panthers to cover on the road in Las Vegas coming up in week 3? And like, how much of an upgrade do you think this is, if at all, Andy Dalton, the new starting quarterback in Carolina, replacing Bryce Young?
It's undoubtedly going to be a much more fun game. My lean there is the over. As you said, it's already coming up, because I think we at least now get both sides being able to quite easily push the ball. That was my question about the Raiders offense as well in Baltimore, was if it push comes to shove, since they obviously can't run the ball, will they just let Gardner Minshew go complete jailbreak and get it done? And we saw that between Devontae Adams' big day, not to mention Brock Bowers already having 17 targets through 2 games. So to me, with that terrible, horrible Panthers defense on the other side, yes, it does make it more exciting. It keeps Deontay Johnson certainly alive for fantasy football as well, since we saw the last time Andy Dalton came under center for the Panthers, he did show life and having multiple 300-yard games. So my lean is over there, and I think the Raiders offense is going to be a lot of fun in that one too.
I just regret all the time I spent this offseason trying to decide between Dalton Kincaid or Trey McBride in fantasy, when the answer apparently was always Brock Bowers, the next big thing.